This is literally the most dressed I've ever been for a video. Hello party people, today I am going to be talking to you about the best books I read in 2020 and I'm so excited to be finally filming this video. I would have gotten it out sooner if my editor didn't decide to start being slow, so sorry about that. It just sucks. It seems like pre-filming for me is a curse because I pre-film a lot and then my editor just stops working, and so then I have a bunch of unedited videos, so I had to get those out of the way before I filmed any new ones. And yay! I'm here to talk about my favorite books of 2020. I have 10 amazing books here. I will preface this video with the fact that I am urging you to look up the trigger warnings for each of these books because I have read a lot of books with very triggering subject matter and just dark and depressing books in general. I always provide trigger warnings in the description box for any books that I mention in my videos, so definitely look down below or look up your own trigger warnings. But I'm going to be very careful with using the word recommend today. Also, I did not rank within the 10 because I would have dropped dead if I had to do that. So I'm not talking about any of these books in particular order. I love them all just as much. And let's get started talking about my favorite books of 2020. I don't own, and we're starting off pretty heavy because I'm going to start with Beloved by Toni Morrison. Sethe is someone who has escaped her enslavement and she is living now in a post-enslavement world. But naturally, she obviously has lots of trauma from that time in her life. So she lives with it, and she lives with this other trauma that she's dealing with in regards to her daughter, who is dead and died at a very young age. She was a baby. And all of the past and everything that she's been trying to bury but cannot seem to be buried under the surface comes back in the form of Paul, who was one of her friends from that past life. And so now it's just, all the trauma is coming back to her. And to make matters worse, a woman stumbles onto her property who goes by the name of Beloved. A very beautiful woman, but a very unnerving woman as well. And the most unnerving part of the situation is that Beloved is the one word that she was able to get etched onto her dead daughter's gravestone. This is one of the most painful books I've ever read. Even if I didn't have a physical emotional reaction, it still doesn't mean that this book is painful. And it's like the way that Toni Morrison was able to so accurately depict the trauma of slavery and grief in the most beautiful writing that I think I've ever read. Toni Morrison, I think, is one of the best writers. No, she definitely is one of the best writers I have ever read from, and I believe she deserves a spot at the top of one of the best writers to ever exist. Her imagery is insane, and I think that's my favorite part of her writing, because I love when an author is able to make you visualize things with the most beautiful of words. And so her imagery is crazy good, and it's like you don't want there to be vivid imagery for a book like this and the descriptions it partakes, because then they're just very traumatic and very sad. And God, we start off right off the bat with some haunting imagery in the first chapter. It's just crazy good writing. The emotional vulnerability is insanely done well. It's just a really good classic, and to be honest, I don't read classics because they're classics. I read classics because they depict stories that I'm not able to find in modern literature anymore. For example, Gothic literature, although there are authors that are doing it, they don't do it the same way that classic Gothic literature does, and so that's why I read Gothic literature most of the times, because I like that atmospheric writing that takes the entire story as a whole as opposed to becoming an element. Although, obviously, we got some good modern Gothic writers, of course. And so this book is Gothic, and it does all of those elements that a Gothic story does well. Slow, ambiotic, I think that's the right word. The characters are done so well. Ugh, the characters are so real. I heavily appreciate when an author does real characters as opposed to characters that are characters, if you know what I mean, because there will be characters that you understand are just characters, and then there will be characters that you understand are real people, and they're 3 dimensions. This book is a horror book as well, so it obviously deals with the horror of slavery and trauma. Reference, of course, I feel like a lot of people reference this video, but Jesse's video where they did a discussion on white people not defining the horror genre and what's scary. It's an amazing video, and I feel like Beloved is one of the books that definitely, you know, fit into that category of what's considered scary or not, because even if you take away that interpretational, but it's not interpretational, it is scary, okay? That kind of more non-specific horror, you've still got the terror elements of the haunted house, because this does have a haunted house in it. It's wickedly haunted. And then the atmosphere, of course, which adds to the Gothic horror, and we all know that's what Gothic horror is. I don't think I'm ever going to reread this book because it is a very hard book to read. Oh my god, something just snapped. Next, I'm going to talk about, like, if I had to put books into my top 3, Felix Ever After, I know for sure would go there. I'm talking about Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender right now. Okay, this book I have an emotional attachment with. I will literally tell everybody to read this book until my end days. Like, one of the best books I've ever read. All of these books, truly, I feel like, are some of the best books I've ever read. Okay, what do I want to talk about the plotline? So, Felix is just an art kid living in New York, going to art school. I forget if this is set during the summer or the school year. Details. He ends up being deadnamed, and pictures of him end up getting released pre-transition from an anonymous person. He doesn't know who it is. He has an idea of who it is, and what he ends up doing is catfishing that person. And this is just about him learning from his mistakes, kind of experiencing this school year, because I'm leaning more on the fact that this is set in a school year. It's just a spectacular queer YA book about feeling like you're just too marginalized and you're just too much of something, and that you're just not enough. It is so good. I will literally have days where I just don't know what to read, and I'm like, I should read Felix Ever After, and then I have to stop myself because the next time I'm going to reread it is when I actually own it. Comfort book, 100%. I just feel like Felix is a character that I relate to on so many levels. Like, much of my feelings reflected so accurately in a book and through a character. This is another book that had really good characters as well. I felt like they were like real people. If you haven't read Felix Ever After yet, what are you doing with your life? The fact that was the book I talked about, and now I'm going to talk about this one, is hilarious to me. Completely different spectrums, energies, times, characters. We're going to talk about Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Do not worry. I feel like I have to kind of put a disclaimer. Do not worry. I know exactly what the story is. I'm not like somebody who has a false idea about this book. I know what this book's about. I know about Nabokov's intentions. I've researched this book a lot. So we're good with that. This is about Humbert, who is an English writer, and he comes to America to write a book. I don't know what he's doing here. He ends up moving in with this single woman and her daughter, and then you know how the story goes. He falls for Dolores, who is the girl in this book. It's weird to say this, but this is, I think, one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. I feel like I would say this with any Nabokov book. I have yet to read anything else he's put out because I have a really bad habit of not reading from authors I love. But I'm really excited. I think he writes like magical realism. Not the point. Nabokov's writing is just very good. I need to expand my vocabulary. I talked about this in my December wrap-up. It's this kind of writing that's complex in the way that it's understandably from its time, but it's also easy to understand. Like, there were some bits where I got a little confused because it got a little dense, but for the most part, I felt like a genius reading this because his reading's fairly easy to understand. And the kind of descriptions he creates, oh, wow. Maybe a little too well. Now, of course, accuracy, once again with the accuracy into getting into the head of the main character, is his accuracy of getting into Humbert Hubbard's head, and Humbert Hubbard's head is insanely weird and like understandable about why people thought this was, I don't know, nonfiction. And I am really hoping that he hasn't done anything terrible with his life, because I'm going to be standing up here looking like a fool if he has. The ending, this is one of the best endings I've read about. Probably one of my favorite endings in the entirety of the books I have here. It's just, like, endings tend to get a bit repetitive for me. I mean, obviously people want to end off on a good note, and I'm glad this book ends off on a good note, but it ends so masterfully with the kind of conclusion of Humbert's thoughts and what he's writing in his jail cell, because this of course is told from the future when he was in jail, which we find out at the beginning. And I really like that foreshadowing as well. Well, not the foreshadowing, but I really like that looking back kind of a story that people tend to write about sometimes. It's just, I love that. Like, we see, well, yeah, I kind of got murdered, so let's look back for an entire novel to see why that happened. And so Lolita takes that standpoint, or that narrative choice, and it's just done so well. But yeah, I really, really liked the ending. One of the best endings I've ever read. If that falls, that'll be hilarious for the video, but as somebody that's always on edge, that's not going to be great for me. Next, we're going to talk about another book that is one that I can more confidently say is beautiful. And that is Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. Yes, another one that I will tell everyone to read. If you read this book, I want you to listen to it, because the narrator does a splendid job of interpreting the book as I'd imagine it to be interpreted. They knew how to do it, and they decided to do it in under 200 pages. Or a little over 200 pages. And I just took out all that unnecessary bit, and it made the adventure even more lovely, so I thought that was cute. I ended up cutting out most of my review for Pet because all of my thoughts were jumbled, and none of it made sense, and I revealed too much. So here are my favorite bits about the book. Obviously, like I've been talking about for most of this video, the writing. I mean, Akwaeke Emezi's magical realism writing is fantastic. It's magical, it's cute, but also dark when it needs to be, and I think it's completely fantastic. I also really like the characters. Sometimes kids can be a bit like older than they seem, but they're really honestly just kids, and I think that's great. One of my favorite themes to read about in books is good versus evil, so I really liked Emezi's approach to that in this book, and the world that they created around this idea. To talk more about the fantastical elements, and now I have to talk about Fablehaven, The Rise of the Evening Star by Brandon Mull. This is the second book in the Fablehaven series, and truly, I could be holding up all of the books here and just put Fablehaven as its own slot in my top 10. Let me get the third book, actually. So, I'm not going to get the first book because it's hidden away somewhere. Covers are spectacular. I need this cover artist to design more middle grade fantasy covers because this art style is everything and more. But the reason I specifically put the second one on my list is because I did like this one better than the other two that I've read so far. So I've read 1 to 3, and 2 so far is my favorite. And I think I can talk about this because book 1 really sets up the world and the characters and the formula that each of the books are going to take. And so I think it really stands well as, honestly, a prequel. I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering the book wrong, but it just has a lot of minor details that get more expanded throughout the rest of the series. So this one we have new characters. We have more development of the antagonist group, the Society of the Evening Star. We obviously have our main characters, Kendra and Seth, growing up. They're in their prime time, and we see them growing up through this series, especially since this book is set a year after the original book. We also have some relic hunting and the worst character to exist. This is a Cold Tear Hate Club, and if you like that man, I need you to get out right now. This one also kind of has a bit of a mystery. Well, they all have a bit of a mystery going on to try and figure out exactly why it's happening and who is causing it. So, like, you're always theorizing. It's such a fun series, and it gets more complex the more you go on, but Brandon Mull really knows how to write for a middle grade / younger teen audience, which is why this series is just so lovely and magical. I need you to read the series. Like, I keep saying this for every book, but one agenda that I will push until I finish the series, which will be a while because there's a whole sequel series I need to read as well, but the agenda I will push is that you need to read Fablehaven. Yes, I'm excited to talk about this one. I'm going to talk about Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Follows Noemi, who's a socialite in the 50s, and her father sends her to High Place where her cousin Catalina lives because he got a distressing letter from her about, like, the family that she's living with being weird because she got married and then his family lives with them. So this was a horror book. This was a good book. This was a good book. This is like who I was referencing for like good modern Gothic horror writers, because I think Garcia really created something very, very spectacular here in terms of like adding to the Gothic literature genre. Noemi is one of my favorite characters now. She is a strong Mexican woman, but not in like the stereotyped way. She's just very, describe her words, she's very, not, was she stubborn? Was she a stubborn character? I don't know. But she's just very like insistent on what she wants, and she doesn't back down. I really hate when strong characters in books, specifically strong female characters in books, will be very adamant on getting their stuff done and getting their point across, and then another character will say something and they'll be like, oh, Noemi, to the end, through thick and thin, was like, yo, I'm not going to let anybody tell me what to do. I'm not going to let anybody stop me from figuring out what's exactly going on here. And I just loved that. Like, she had her own character development, but she didn't change as a person. I also read this in one day, so it didn't seem as slow to me, but I like the descriptions of the house and how literal it was. It was like dirty, and the mushrooms and the wallpaper, everything like that was really cool. Kind of made me had an interest in all of that stuff. We have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, another fantastic writer. David is an American, and he wants to escape his American life. Honestly, he's just living my dream. I just want to move away to Paris or some European country and to never look back. But he ends up going to Paris, and he meets these two old white gay dudes. Freaking creeps to the max, okay? Why? Okay. But through these dudes, he meets Giovanni, and this is about the exploration of their relationship. And I think, yeah, this book is set from the future as well, so again, we have that. We get to know what happens at the beginning, but we kind of see the build up to that. Baldwin's writing is fantastic, incredible. It's not in the so complex like Toni Morrison's writing, but it is still intricate in the way he develops language and the words and choices he uses and the rhetorical devices he uses. This was a school book, and so I read it in chunks just to be on track, and I just kept wanting more. I would read literally the chunks that I had in 15 minutes, which is a big deal because it usually takes me like a minute per page. So this one was quick to get through, alright? And also the pages are like super thick, and so I feel like I kept flipping and skipping pages. I mean, I did, because I'm dumb. Anyways, one of my favorite things about this book is the separation from American culture, because this is an American classic. But Baldwin makes a huge point on being like the old culture versus new culture. New culture, of course, references New York, a place of the future, and then Paris is a place of the past. It's actually one of my favorite quotes from the book. I don't know the specific quote. I really like the Paris setting. It worked really well with what the story was meant to be. And I kind of like the singular settings as well. Obviously named Giovanni's room properly because they spend most of their time in his living area. And I also very, very much enjoyed that Baldwin wrote about a bisexual character, because around this time and before, people or writers would specifically write about gay and lesbian characters because that's all that they knew about to label and to speak of in terms of homosexuality. Baldwin instead changes that whole conflict that ends up being for those single interest characters to someone who likes everyone, and it just confuses our character even more and just changes how he thinks about his sexuality, because he still loves Gila, who is his fiance, of course, but he also loves Giovanni, not in the same way, but also in the same way. He makes a point about saying that his love for women and men are different. I really liked that, because then we don't have to go down such that traditional way that gay characters' conflicts often are when they're trying to figure out who they are. Okay, it's been a while since I read this book, so I might not be able to talk about it to the greatest extent I can, but that is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Tokarsuk, I think. I apologize to the max. So we follow our main character, who is an eccentric older woman, and she ends up finding her neighbor Bigfoot dead in his house. I think he choked, but it was like a really bad freak accident. And then soon after that, more people end up being found dead, and she has her theories about it being the animals that are killing these people, and she's trying to express this to people, but they're not listening. And the book is basically about like who deserves a voice and who gets to be heard, because nobody wants to listen to this fantastic woman. Oh my god, one of the most interesting characters I've ever read. I really like the extremity. I feel like the extremity of being, I don't know, vegan and being very much in tune with nature and like being anti-meat eaters is working to the best it can for this character, as opposed to if like she was just mild with all of her passions. Especially with what this book is meant to be about. It's meant to be about animal cruelty. How she's getting so frustrated because she's trying to tell people about her theories, and they're like, no, it's okay, sweetie. No, listen to her. Because what she was speaking was very valid, to be honest. And the way that she would just talk about things, she is very solid evidence, very solid evidence. I also liked how many different things we kind of talked about in terms of animal cruelty. We talk about hunting and grocery stores, and then we also talk about religion, which is one of my favorite things. One of my favorite discussions of this book, because more towards the end of the book, she has a conversation with this priest, but he's like, oh, well, animals aren't going to survive the Great Awakening. What is it called? They aren't going to survive Judgment Day because they don't believe in God and they don't believe in the same religion that I do, which is something that I learned about when I was very young. I'm Roman Catholic, so one thing you learn about at church is that animals' only purpose is to provide for humans, and they don't go to heaven. A very frustrating concept, and I feel like it was talked about very well in the book, and so that was one of my favorite discussions. I generally really love discussions around religion, so that occurred as it must. Okay, and then I have On Earth You Are Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. I'm not going to talk about this book much because I had to talk a lot about it for school, so I'm kind of tired talking about it. But oh my god, Ocean Vuong is my favorite poet now. Oh, well, my favorite male poet, I guess. Or I'll say modern writer, because obviously Sappho has my heart and she is probably my favorite poet, female poet. But I love Ocean Vuong just as much, especially as someone who doesn't love modern poetry. And I mentioned that, even though this book is prose, I do mention that because he is a poet at heart and that's what he does. So this book is a letter from a son, Little Dog, to his mother who is illiterate, and in this letter he just describes his life growing up as an immigrant child and this relationship that he had with this white boy named Trevor. This is another one that I'm going to heavily emphasize on the writing because as a poet, Vuong knows how to artfully craft the English language. Oh my god. I'm more self-aware of the rhetorical devices used in this book because obviously I had to analyze that. But his use of repetition, of long sentences, of anaphoras, it just works so well because those are typically things that are used in poetry, specifically repetition and anaphoras. And so the fact that he translates that to his prose just shows how much he's trying to present his poetic roots. I can't wait to read everything that he's ever published. Have you ever seen this man speak in interviews? He's mastered language, which is pretty funny too because this is one of the main themes of this book is language and the importance of language. And then the final book I'm going to talk about today is one that I read way at the beginning of the year. It was one of the 6 books I read from January to June, and that is, or January to May I should say actually, and that is The Grace Year by Kim Liggett. I apologize. Also, I didn't look that up. I totally forgot to look up who the author was, and then I remembered, so that's good for me. This is a dystopian novel about our main character who lives in this village. It's like a dystopian in the way that's like alternate world, something like that. Or is it? It's very ambiguous like The Village is. That's one of my favorite movies, by the way, so it's definitely one I'd compare it to. But she lives in this traditional village, and you know how it goes. Women are seen as less than, and they have to follow specific rules, and men are just the worst. So it's her grace year, which means when a girl is 16 years old, she has to go out into the forest that nobody is allowed to go out into and release all her magic for a year, I think. I think they say that. Yeah, for a year. The grace year. Hello, Isadora. Okay, I listened to the audiobook. This was one of the first audiobooks I ever listened to. But this book is insane. I did compare it to The Handmaid's Tale, of course, in terms of dystopian feminist books. Lord of the Flies and The Village, like I said. It's so good. Heavily influenced on Lord of the Flies because the place that they go to live to release their magic is just this circular area with a couple of like places, like buildings almost. Not really though, they're more like farmhouses, and they just reside here, left alone. The world is terrifying, and I say that obviously as a girl, but the story is just so interesting. It's hard to talk about this book because there's a lot of plot twist after plot twist after plot twist, and it shocked me so much. And then there's an element of this book as well that I didn't expect, so like I'm gonna let you figure that one out. I just remember loving it and enjoying my experience, and I need more like feminist dystopian books like this because I genuinely really do enjoy seeing women rising from the ashes in a world that hates them so much. So that's the end of the video. I know that I've been talking for so long, but I just have so much to say about all of these books. I literally love them all so much. So thank you so much for watching. Leave down a flower emoji if you've made it to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed me squealing about all of my favorite books. And I'll see you next time.
Bye.